It
DK.
is DK Metcalf. And number 14 belongs to George Pickens. But DK Metcalf, we'll see what number he has. Now, DK was traded to the Steelers. The Steelers gave up a second-round pick, and they swapped seventh-round pick and a sixth-round pick. So a sixth-round pick goes to the Seahawks. And then they instantly paid him 5 years, 150 mil, 30 million per season.
Woo.
I think this says a lot of things. I mean, number one, the Steelers don't have a quarterback yet. So I think that's the most important thing that they need to solve. But this is interesting from a stylistic perspective. DK Metcalf and George Pickens are both top 5 in terms of goal routes ran and for the entirety of the season. You look at their just deep targets overall and how they line up, like wide alignment. DK is at 86.4%. That's second in the NFL. Pickens is at 77.9%. That's ninth in the NFL. And on 20-plus yard targets, DK has 32, tied first, and Pickens is at 31, and that's third. So these two receivers are used in a similar way. It makes me wonder what the roles are going to be. Are they just going to run them on similar route concepts, or is somebody going to play more on the inside? DK was very frustrated with his role, all things considered, last year in Seattle. So maybe he wants an entire role change. But I think DK Metcalf is a good wide receiver. I don't think he's a great wide receiver. I think he's a little bit overrated because he can just run deep routes. And I think in an offense like the Chargers, it would have been perfect because Ladd McConkey can do all the other stuff, and DK just has to worry about running deep. But looking at DK Metcalf, like his intermediate targets and the efficiency on them and on short targets, he is one of the most inefficient players in the NFL, and so is George Pickens. These are two players that when they get targeted in the intermediate and short areas of the field, DK ranks 54th in EPA per target. Pickens is 72nd in EPA per target on intermediate routes, and DK 75th in separation, and Pickens is 72nd in separation out of 84 wide receivers. So this is very much like two receivers who do the same thing. I think all this signals to me is that they have little faith in George Pickens long term, and this is very much a prove-it year for him. And DK gets paid. I think, having at least a reliable receiver in there helps because Pickens is not reliable because of his attitude. But overall, like, does this change my outlook on the Steelers? Not much. I just think the quarterback play is just a major question still.
Absolutely. This trade was definitely one that caught me by surprise. As a Steeler fan, I expected us to use that 52nd overall pick on a receiver in the draft on day 2. Steelers are a team that's notorious for drafting well at the position, but this was all built up over the last couple of weeks of the season where George Pickens missed some time, and he comes back in the Chief game. We lose on Christmas Day, doesn't have a great game. And the following week, with a chance to win the division still at home versus the Bengals, he has 3 drops, -1 yards, and 1 catch in a game where he was really not himself at any point. And it kind of was that moment in time as a Steeler fan where it was a reality check that for as great as Pickens can be, and for all of his highs, which have been pretty incredible, I've watched this guy have 195 receiving yards in the game, there's still that floor with Pickens and that maturity that he needs to grow from. And so when the Steelers make this type of move to me and they give DK Metcalf a 5-year contract for $32 million APY, it signals that they are a lot more comfortable and confident paying DK that money. And to me, it's a make or break year for Pickens to stay in Pittsburgh. And like you highlighted, Joel, how well can they complement one another in the intermediate space? Because Roman Wilson, he was supposed to be drafted to become that, hasn't played a game yet. And Calvin Austin, like Pickens, will be a free agent in a year. So for Pittsburgh, there's a lot of questions with this move to really figure out how well it's going to work. But I disagree strongly. I think Metcalf's underrated. This is a guy that posted 1,300 yards his second year in 2020 and had back-to-back seasons with 10 touchdowns. The last couple of years with Shane Waldron and Ryan Grubb, all the receivers there have been disgruntled and frustrated, and none of them have really quite been maximized to go along poor pass protection. Pittsburgh's building a good line. I think Arthur Smith's better than Seattle's had. And if DK is getting this type of faith by the Pittsburgh front office, a team that is historically very stingent on paying receivers, it's a voting confidence that he's going to bounce back after this last season, and I'm pretty excited to welcome him to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, my only issue is who's the quarterback, man? Who's the quarterback going to be? And that's been the issue in Pittsburgh since Big Ben left. Who's going to be the quarterback? Who's going to be the guy? You can get as many receivers as you want. You can go out there, put George Pickens, get DK, grab another wide receiver in the draft, but who's going to be the guy throwing them the ball? And I think that's been a thing that's been lacking in terms of just not having that consistent, consistent guy at the quarterback position. I mean, Pittsburgh has been a middling team for a while now in terms of just they're a team that wins 10 to 11 games, probably 9. They'll get to the playoffs, get to the first round, and then they'll lose in however fashion, particularly ass-whooping fashion, but they'll lose in the first round. But getting DK, it's weird because, like you mentioned, they weren't really on the market for him. I felt like they were, trying to build that O-line up. They're trying to figure out their quarterback situation. They've been in talks to potentially get Aaron Rodgers, but then I saw a report saying he might go to the Giants. So they're trying to figure that out. Then they just wall out and trade for DK, somebody who's been disgruntled, also had his own issues with the offensive coordinator in Seattle, his issues last year in terms of his maturity, and he's a little bit older than Pickens. I feel like both guys are really talented. I'm with you, Joel, in the sense of I think DK is a good wide receiver. I don't think he's a top 15, top 20 guy, but I think George Pickens has some untapped potential looming. He just has to figure out his maturity issues, and he has to be a better leader on the field. But definitely interesting to see how a Pittsburgh offense, which hasn't been the most well-organized offense, it hasn't been the most well-organized machine over the past couple of years, how do they manage DK's personality, Pickens' personality, and their play styles, especially with no idea of who their quarterback's going to be? But Pittsburgh's trying to make the right moves. You paid DK $150. That's cool, I guess, giving him $30 million. I just felt like this move kind of is a move to add on talent and not really and worry about the fit later. Just bring in as much talent as you want and then figure out the fit.
Fit is a little weird. These do feel like two receivers that lap over each other a lot in terms of what they're great at and what their weaknesses are, as Joel pointed out with some of the numbers. Like DK is not a superstar. He's not a superstar. So we're not going to sit here and act like you just get this top 5 level dude. Now he's shown at times, like John mentioned in year 2, to be able to play at a really high level. But it's also been some years where DK has played at that level. 10 touchdowns, as you mentioned, John. Those are impressive. But I think this past year, I was a bit surprised Ryan Grubb got fired. I didn't think he was terrible in terms of being a play caller. I feel like the offensive line was the biggest issue there. And if you want to say offensive line sometimes goes back to play calling, it goes back to coaching in general, not being able to coach those guys up, that's fine. But I also saw that he found out relatively quickly, halfway through his first year calling plays that, JSN is by far and away our most talented player. And once JSN became the focal point of the passing game, we saw his numbers go crazy. And now I don't think anybody is taking DK Metcalf over JSN after coming into this season. After JSN's rookie year, it probably didn't feel that way. So I was a bit surprised, even though I probably shouldn't have been at the contract. Now, the guaranteed money hasn't come out yet, unless I've just missed it. But I haven't seen anything in terms of guarantees. So if it's 150 million and 70 million is guaranteed, I don't think that's as big of a deal compared to like if $100 million is guaranteed, then it's like, okay, you're really locked in with this guy for probably 3 or 4 out of these 5 years. So that's going to matter more than the actual, total. But I think what Riv said is partially true, is that the Steelers need talent desperately, right? This is a team that has been putting out some really questionable wide receiver cores for the last couple of years opposite of George Pickens. And this is a team that historically has been so great at drafting and developing talent that they haven't really been hitting on outside of Pickens, most notably. So what I think they're going to do at quarterback, Justin Fields is going to be a Jet. I think Russell Wilson throwing those moon balls to George Pickens and DK Metcalf, that feels like a match made in heaven to me. I don't know about you, John, because Justin Fields, we already chatted on the phone. He doesn't want to go to y'all. He feel like you guys did him dirty. You guys don't fucking respect him as a quarterback. He doesn't want to deal with that bullshit anymore. So I think he's going over to New York. But overall, second-round pick, $150 million. It was pricey, but for a guy that is as young as he is and gives you the athleticism that you really can't find, athleticism and size combo, being 6'4", being able to, beat corners one-on-one down the field. I know his contested catch numbers, it was like sub 40% last year. It wasn't pretty for the size he is, but you think with his frame, especially what he can do after the catch, how fast he is, just, he could take a slant to the crib, even though he doesn't do it often. You have to hope there's some untapped potential there.
I'm surprised nobody said that that the Steelers should have been in the sweepstakes for Geno Smith. And if somebody did, then I apologize for not listening. Geno Smith, the fact that he went for a 3rd-round pick to to the Las Vegas Raiders. That should have been the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you ask me. Now, instead, they trade better draft compensation for a position that's definitely of need. Riv, I get where you're coming from. Like, it wasn't the first thing that popped out of you, but I always felt they did need a number 2. And that was kind of evident last season. So now you have 2 firm wide receivers. The issue is now you're paying one $30 million a year. And now it's more than likely that George Pickens will not be returning back to the team once he's done with his first contract. I think that the Steelers had a missed opportunity here. Geno Smith definitely would have made me feel a lot more optimistic, not only if I'm a Steelers fan, but just going in purely unbiased, looking at their situation for this upcoming season. We talk about how great of a move it was for the Raiders. We like Geno's skill set. We think that he's a lot better than what the numbers do say. Extremely accurate, just was put in a pretty terrible situation given that offensive line. I think that where now you have DK Metcalf giving up a second-round pick for him, I didn't hate. When I heard that it was going to be lowered from a first-round pick to a second-round pick, I thought that was fair. That's where I thought that my Broncos might step in. When I heard that it was $30 million for 5 years, that's where, of course, that's where I started to look at this and not feel as optimistic as I did prior to hearing when the money came out. It'll be interesting to see who plays quarterback for you guys. Again, a missed opportunity not going at Geno Smith, but again, at least there's a strong foundation that if you do go ahead, you bring Russell Wilson back into this offense. You know he's had strong rapport with DK Metcalf. Obviously, last year with George Pickens, even if the two didn't get along the best, I still look at this situation and think that this is a team that can still win 9 games.
Yeah, and looking at DK's skill set, I'm just going to share a video file here. I feel like this is what he offers that George Pickens doesn't. I feel like George Pickens wins in contested catch situations, but I think DK is really good in like these subtle double move routes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to see like he's over here on the bottom of the screen and he's just really excels at just moving very fluid on these deep routes down the field. And I think,
that shit was crazy.
yes, this is something that I think George Pickens doesn't offer. He's more of a contested catch artist. So I think DK brings a level of athleticism that the Steelers do need. And I'm curious to see like if this is on Sauce Gardner. I'm curious to see if that DK is just using a different way, if he can be better, you know. And this is from the end zone angle, just the catch he had on Sauce. I thought it was pretty good. I think he shows a good ability to track the ball, but this is where I get frustrated at Geno. And this is where like we talk about the contested catch situations. I was tracking it earlier. He went 2 for 8 on them, and that's 25%. This is against Pat Surtain. Yeah, he's a great corner, but he usually doesn't come down with these balls like that. And I'm going to skip this one because I feel like this is an even better example. So where this throw is a little bit underthrown, but DK has it, and then he just drops it. And I feel like on film, this is on display a lot. There are moments where he catches. This is one of his 2 catches that he had. JSN threw it, and DK just makes the leap. And that's what you want to see more of. But there's too many times where it looks like this, where you have a perfectly thrown ball, it's in his hands, and when he just gets contacted to the ground, he just drops the ball.
I mean, like you got to understand that, in my opinion.
I feel like the one before, I feel like Geno could have put a little bit more out there. It would have been a clean one, and he could have just
I think
this one, he takes a lick.
Yeah, but I feel like the 6'4", I want you to make that catch. I think he should definitely haul it in. It's a hard catch. You know, contested catch situations are always going to be very difficult, but that's kind of just like what I see from DK Metcalf and where he could just be better at. And we'll see if he's used differently. I think if he's used differently, then maybe he'll realize his potential with Mike Tomlin. But, you know, clearly quarterback play was not an issue in Seattle. So I'm kind of curious to see if it's more of the offensive fit with DK and trying to see if he'll be better in Pittsburgh.
I'm excited about it, man, because I think Pittsburgh needs something. And I get it. Like,
I hope they get nothing.
DK's personality is a little bit off. George Pickens' personality is off the fucking wall. He gives me young boy vibes. But definitely I think you need a veteran at quarterback. You know, I think that's really the circle, like, on the board. Like, who's going to be the quarterback for DK Metcalf, who gets frustrated fast, mass, and then a George Pickens who still is finding his way in terms of his maturity in the league. I mean, he fights damn near every game, and he's talking crazy. He's grabbing somebody's mask. He's throwing tantrums off the field. So who's going to be able to control all that?